So this is every parent's worst nightmare. Not only are you dealing with the death of a child, but you have been accused of murder. Well, hello my silky friends. It's that time again. It's Sunday and it's story time. Actually, this is the second story time for me because I shot this whole video and realized my lighting was, no. Unfortunately, this one's probably going to be a lot shorter because I'm just about out of a voice now. If you're new to my channel, I'm Lily and this is Silky Southern Tea. We do vintage crime, we do mysteries, we do paranormal. So if that is something that you think you would be interested in, then hit that subscribe button right now. Do it. Okay, so today's tea is chai latte, chai, whatever. It is like fall in a cup. And it's very cold now. In my first video, you can see the steam. But, I'm going with it. So, it is what it is. Today's hat is more modern because we're not going back that far in history. We're going back to the 80s and 90s. I mean, the 1980s and 90s, yeah. So, I had a whole outfit for this, but, you know what? I thought I was done. I put on something comfortable, and this is what you're left with. Let's get right into it, and let's breeze on through. Alright, this story begins in 1986 when a lady named Patricia, who goes by Patty, was working in a convenience store. Now, Patty was born somewhere around 1964-65. The details are kind of sketchy on her, but she was young. In 1986, she was very young, and she was a clerk in a store. As things happen, there was this nice-looking guy named David Stallings. He used to come in, and they'd talk a little bit. A little flirting, I'm sure, went on. Finally, David asked Patty out. I'm assuming things went well, because very shortly after that, they were married in 1988. So, here they are, a newly married couple, happy, and, as all these stories go, things progress, and Patty is expecting. So, they're really excited. So, in April of 1890, I'm so used to the 1800s. So, in April of 1989, their son Ryan was born. Everything's good, new parents adjustment. Well, in July of 1989, so Ryan's only a few months old, he starts getting sick, but this is not a normal sickness. He's vomiting, he's lethargic, and then he starts having shortness of breath, and this is totally abnormal. So Patty, in a panic, rushes him to Cardinal Glennon Children's Hospital. So she hands Ryan over to the ER staff. They take the baby. Obviously, he's in a lot of distress. And so by this time, David meets her at the hospital, and they're sitting there in the lobby just kind of waiting for somebody to tell him what's going on. But then the doctor comes out, and he says, okay, I need to talk to you all, but separately. Well, that's kind of weird, but she, doesn't think a whole lot about it. You're really just concerned, is my baby okay? So when they get them in separate rooms, they start asking them very personal questions, such as, how is your relationship with, your husband or wife? Have you been fighting lately? Are there problems? And they're both like, no. Just what's wrong with my son? It's at this point that the doctors explain to her that Ryan has been poisoned with antifreeze. You can imagine she's flabbergasted. I mean, how? How did this happen? I don't know what's going on in her head, but she may think, they've made a mistake. I don't know. They're really just worried about Ryan recovering. So Ryan is in the hospital for a couple of weeks. Well, when he gets out, they let her know, Ryan won't be coming home with you. he is going into child protective custody because we have evidence that somebody poisoned your son. Of course, they're devastated, but in Patty's head, they're just, this is just a procedure. It's a process. Obviously, they're going to realize that they would never hurt their son, and so she just goes along with it. Well, they have visitation on every Thursday morning, once a week, for 1 hour only. So the first 5 weeks go by and, there's no incidents. Patty is not ashamed. She goes to work and she tells her coworkers and her family about how the visits went and how excited she is to see Ryan the next time, and just hoping this is going to all be straightened out soon. Well, on the 6th week, David's parents had not seen Ryan, and of course they want to see their grandson, so they decide to come to the visitation with David and Patty. And so they're there only about 20 minutes, and then they feel like, I need to give the parents some space and bonding time, right? So as they get up to leave, David walks his parents out the door. Patty is left alone with Ryan. Now, David says that it was no more than 45 seconds. That he literally just walked them out to the door and he came back in. Later on, the prosecution would say it was 3 to 8 minutes. There's a big discrepancy there. According to David, when he came back in the room, he could see that Ryan was getting fussy, as babies do, and so he thought he's probably hungry. He reaches into the bag that the foster parents had made up. Okay, these bottles were not made by David and Patty, but by the foster parents. And he grabs a bottle, and they feed Ryan. Well, everything's fine. Ryan goes back to the foster parents. But then, somewhere between 3 and 4 days after, I said days, not hours, days, Ryan starts having the same symptoms that he had initially. And this time it's worse. So, of course, the foster parents rush him to the hospital, and once again, they test Ryan's blood, and they say, this is antifreeze poisoning. And the foster parents are like, well, Patty was alone with Ryan for a while. So, the first thing that the police do is they go to David and Patty's house, and they arrest her. Like, they were coming back from somewhere. They didn't even let her go in the house. They put her in handcuffs and drug her right to the police station. Well, Patty's thinking, okay, this is just a misunderstanding. I'm only going to be here a few hours. But those hours turn to days and weeks and months. As the lab test came back and testimony, the hospital was convinced that Ryan had been poisoned with antifreeze. Now, Ryan was not doing well. So after time passes and they can see Ryan is not going to make a recovery, they call David in and they say, we need permission to take him off life support. And, David said that was one of the hardest things that he ever had to do. Well, I can imagine. So David actually holds Ryan for about 3 hours as the machines are turned off and as Ryan slowly slips away. And Patty didn't even get to see Ryan. So David has to call Patty in jail and tell her that their son has passed away. I think this was probably a major breaking point for her, because now it's not just the hope that they can get back together, but now she knows she's going to be charged with murder. And that is exactly what happens. So they've got this big case against Patty. They've got all this lab results saying that this is definitely antifreeze poisoning, and Patty was the only one with Ryan, before when he got sick, and then during visitation. It's got to be her, right? But now, while Patty is in jail, something unexpected happens. She realizes that she is pregnant again. So, there she is, having to go through this whole pregnancy, being incarcerated, and then finally she gives birth to their second son, who they named David Jr. From the very beginning, Child Services said you will never have custody of this child. So they immediately put the brand new baby in foster care. And Patty says she saw the baby in the hospital and then once when he was a week old, and that was it. But what happens next stuns everybody. David Jr. is in foster care the whole time. And all of a sudden, he starts having these same symptoms as Ryan had. He is lethargic. He's vomiting. He's having shortness of breath. It's obviously he cannot breathe. So the foster parents rush David Jr. to the ER. They do all the testing, and they say that David Jr. has a rare condition called MMA, which is methylmalonic acidemia. Basically what this means is that instead of breaking down the fats and proteins like our bodies usually do, it doesn't break down correctly, and so it gives off all these toxins. And these toxins turn into something that is propionic acid, in turn propylene glycol, okay? I know that's technical. That's the nurse in me. I don't know what to say. Now, you would think this would be great news for David and Patty because Ryan has this rare condition called MMA. It is so rare that most doctors, they may have studied it along with a million other diseases, but it's so rare that it's not even on their radar to think about or remember. But Patty's lawyer got a hold of this information, and he brought it to the prosecution, and he said, hey, look, this new baby has MMA, has the same kind of conditions that Ryan had, and I believe this will prove that my client is innocent. So the DA goes back, talks to the lab, people, the doctor, and they're like, well, yes, we have retested the blood, and yes, Ryan did have MMA, but he also had ethylene glycol in his system, so he had MMA and antifreeze. That's what they were told. He says, there is no way I'm dropping the charges against Patty Stallings because she definitely killed Ryan. Now, there are a couple holes to this story. One is that, again, with Ryan, Patty wasn't around him. It was 3 or 4 days after she supposedly fed him antifreeze. If you ever had a pet that accidentally drank antifreeze, you will see that poisoning start in just a few hours, not days. So when they were asked, well, why did you not notice any symptoms for days? And they were like, well, when Ryan came back from the hospital, we needed a respite break, so we gave him to some other foster parents for the weekend to take care of him so we could, have some R&R. And because of that, the first set of foster parents felt like, well, these other ones don't really know Ryan, so he probably was having symptoms, but they just didn't recognize it. Like, you're not gonna recognize vomiting and shortness of breath in an infant. I'm sorry, I don't buy it. And neither did Patty's attorney, but this is what the DA was bound and determined to believe. Now, this story made headlines, okay? And there was so much controversy about it that it led to a very unusual event. Unsolved Mysteries caught wind of this story, and they wanted to talk to David and Patty and, kind of see if they could figure out what was actually going on here. And when they did, it's pretty obvious that these people seem completely 100% genuine. And I actually went back and watched that episode again. I did see it when it originally, it was a long time ago. I was way young then. And I did see that original episode, and it was a fascinating story. And I'm sure everybody, felt the same way I did. And I think it's like the 2nd or 3rd season. It's on YouTube. You can find it. If I can find it again, I'll leave a link below. So anyway, I saw their story, as did a guy named William Sly. Now, he was a biochemist, and he gets another doctor, Dr. Shoemaker, involved. Dr. Shoemaker was from, let me get this right, the metabolic screening lab at St. Louis University. Dr. Shoemaker was very familiar with this kind of condition and how easily it can be misunderstood. So they requested samples of Ryan's blood to be tested in their lab also. Of course, the parents and the lawyer, everybody's trying to help this case. Now, when this lab ran the test, it was shown that Ryan 100% died from MMA, not ethylene glycol. So how did that happen? They're similar, but they're not the same. Now, also, what Dr. Shoemaker said is ethylene glycol is not a natural metabolite of MMA or anything in the body. I mean, it basically is antifreeze, so he knows something has gone wrong. So then he asked the prosecutor, George McElroy, what methods did you use to actually test this? And so the prosecutor gives over the lab names and information. When it was examined by the new lab, they said, this test is not accurate. So long story short, what they ended up doing is sending samples of Ryan's blood to a lot of different labs. And although many of them came back with MMA, a few of them came back with ethylene glycol. So that's what prompted them to look into the testing methods. And when they really examined that, they realized that these other labs were not doing the test correctly, because actually, according to their results, if you were to take that ethylene glycol or antifreeze level in Ryan's blood as fact, Ryan would have had to have over a gallon of antifreeze to have that much in his bloodstream. So, I mean, clearly, he would have died long before that, okay? There would have been no trace amounts. They bring this information to the prosecutor, and he is just not buying it. He's not having it. He is so much against Patty. The whole justice system is. In fact, Patty couldn't even go to Ryan's funeral because when she requested to get out of jail to attend that, the judge said, there is no way I'm letting a baby killer out of the jail to go to a funeral. Okay, so there was a lot of bias. I don't care what they say. This is obvious bias. You already had an idea of what you thought happened. So the new evidence about David Jr. having MMA is brought to the prosecution, but the prosecutor wants that banned. He is not buying this whole thing, and this is before all of the lab testing was done. He goes to the judge, and he has this whole evidence suppressed. So the jurors never heard that David Jr. had a similar condition, and he was never around the parents. Look, all they hear is that Patty takes care of this boy, and, they find antifreeze in his system, and then, he's fine when he's with the foster parents, but then you turn around 6 weeks later, and she's with him for a few minutes, and he's sick again. Now, David Jr. did survive. Also, what the jurors never heard was any character witnesses for Patty. Her attorney didn't bring up anybody to say, hey, Patty is a great mother. She's a great person. She would never do this. There was really nothing much to say except for Patty to sit there and say, I didn't do it, and the lab tests say you did. So, of course, Patty is found guilty of first-degree murder, and she is sentenced to life in prison without parole. And it is around this time that Unsolved Mysteries got involved, so I'm kind of off timeline a little bit. So David Sr. is there at home. His wife's in jail, and he can't see David Jr. except very limited, so they're not bonding. He's living with the foster parents, and this goes on for quite some time. Now, after the second set of lab results are brought to the attention of everyone, they decided, I guess we're going to have to give Patty a new trial. And so they let her out temporarily, and they put her on house arrest. Now, she was still not able to see her second son, but at least she wasn't in jail for that time. Eventually, during all of this back and forth with the evidence, it became 100% clear that Patty had nothing to do with it, and the prosecution was forced to drop the charges. So in 1991, a press conference with the DA, McElroy, and the Stallings, in which he says, I can never repay all the suffering that the Stallings have gone through, little song and dance, here's my fiddle, right? I mean, what can he say? And Patty, I think, does a really good job. She's sitting next to him, and I mean, I'm just saying, she seems like she's fine. I could not have sat at the same table with this man. I'm just tell you right now, I would be out. Eventually, after David Jr. is a full year and a half old, he is finally returned to David and Patty Stallings, who have to start over, with this 1.5-year-old. So the story has a happy ending, but it doesn't, because there's more. Even though Patty was exonerated, she later sued the hospital and the lab. Now, she didn't sue the DA's office or law enforcement, but she did sue medical, because truly, it was on them. And she won her case. She won several $1 million. I don't know how much. But the sad truth is that Patty and David were never the same. I mean, you can imagine. I'm just saying, he had to have thoughts sometime, wondering in the beginning, is she capable of this? I can tell you this from working in the corrections field in nursing, like I do. Being in a situation like that, she was in jail for 2 years. That had to completely change her. There's just things. You're just not going to come out the same person. And that's kind of what happened. David and Patty tried really hard to make it work and, to raise their son. But ultimately they divorced. And it's said that Patty, just kind of went on a wild spending spree. They said she bought a Corvette in every color or for every day of the week, something like that. I don't know. I think she was probably trying to fill that void, to something, that big hole. First of all, she never got to really grieve Ryan because she had no closure. She literally just gave him to the ER doctors and never, that's it. Then he's away from her, and next thing she knows, he's passed away, and she doesn't even get to go to the funeral. I can't imagine what psychologically that does. I'm sure because of all the negative publicity that everybody had to put their 2 cents in, your friends, family, neighbors, community. I mean, everybody had pretty much just said she was guilty, and she's this horrible, person that would kill her own infant. I don't know. I give her a lot of leeway for this, for being young and having such a devastating situation. Anyway, they divorced. David goes on to marry a couple of times. Unfortunately, Patty, let me say first that there is not any real information online. Not like official, like there is with David Stallings, but I was on a lot of different message boards where some family members and stuff, said basically Patty just deserted the family. She deserted David Jr. Now, I don't know what the whole story was, but I can imagine after the devastation of losing your first child and everything that happened, and then not even meeting your second one till he's 1.5 years old. I would like to think I would be a better mother, but I haven't walked in those shoes, and neither have you. So I just think judging her on what a mind can and a heart can take, it's I don't think we can do that. Other people have said that David Jr. had a lot of physical problems. Of course, he always had MMA, which, strangely enough, later on, after they were 100% sure that Ryan had it. The actual treatments that he was given for antifreeze treatment probably contributed to his death because they didn't know. That's what they were dealing with. So they did the complete wrong thing. That's really not surprising in the situation. Anyway, David Jr., some people say that he was in and out of like therapy, mental hospitals and stuff throughout his life. I don't know what his story was. I don't know if that's true. That's what I've read from supposed family members. But what we do know for sure is that David Jr. died in 2013 and he was 23 years old. Now, I don't know if it was sickness. I don't know what it was. Nobody's talking, so I don't know if it was complications or not. Also, David Sr. died in 2019, and it just says in his obituary after a long illness. So, where Patty is and what her name is, I have no idea. I imagine she wants to stay under the radar, and I get it. Now, let me tell you one interesting thing that I thought was so funny, okay? When Patty was exonerated and the prosecutor who gave her so much trouble, George McElroy, went to run for office again, Patty actually gave a $10,000 contribution to his opponent, Robert Wilkins, who won the election. George McElroy, even after he lost, he talked to Wilkins, the new one replacing him, and he wanted to give him all the information that he had on Patty Stallings' case. Now, I don't know why you'd want to do that. This is over. Well, when Patty found out about it, she went to the courts and she asked that her record be expunged because literally she did nothing wrong. It was completely out of her hands. But Missouri said they could expunge some of it, but some of them they had to keep because it had been a felony case in the state. I don't know, whatever. It was a huge miscarriage of justice. It should have never happened. I mean, there were so many times after the initial shock and diagnosis that this could have been stopped. But thankfully, Patty, first of all, didn't get the death penalty. Secondly, that she didn't spend but just 2 years in jail, which I know is still too much. But it could have been far worse. Tell me this. Have you ever heard this story? I haven't really heard a good explanation of this online. And what do you think? Do you think it was fair, the way she was treated? I mean, do you think it was reasonable? So that is our story this week for Not Guilty November. We've got several other ones coming up that are crazy vintage stories. I think you'll really like them. And now I really don't have a voice, and I hope everything is good on this video or I'm going to cry. And I don't even know what's going to happen. I hope you have a great week, that you're enjoying this fall weather, and I will see you again next week. In the meantime, stay silky.